Let's do this. Well, thank you so much for joining today for our MBA Academy Understanding the Business of Climate. We're really excited for our conversation today, and I'll be introducing our speaker, Chrissa Pagitsas, in just a moment. But before I do that, I wanted to quickly introduce ClimateCAP. We've got a lot of new faces that are joining us, and I'd just like to tell you a little bit more about ClimateCAP more broadly. So we were founded with the mission to prepare tomorrow's business leaders, which is you all, today's MBA students, to understand and respond to the climate challenge by mainstreaming the climate conversation in business schools. My name is Jessica Wingert, and I am the program lead of ClimateCAP based here at Duke's Fuqua School of Business. ClimateCAP was founded and continues to be led by us here at Fuqua, but we are a global partnership of 41 business schools, and we work really closely with the staff and faculty at those schools on a number of different initiatives, including our MBA Summit, our ClimateCAP Fellowship, as well as this very special MBA Academy virtual learning series. If you haven't yet signed up for our mailing list, please make sure that you do so you can stay up to date on all of these events. I just mentioned the 41 partner schools, and so I wanted to highlight some of those schools which are supporting ClimateCAP at both the leading and supporting partner level. We want to thank them for making this program and our other initiatives possible. For those of you who are prospective MBAs, please go ahead and check out the list of all of our partner schools, and you can link directly to their sites from our website. And hopefully by now you've heard of our ClimateCAP MBA Summit, but this is our flagship event every year, bringing together hundreds of MBA students from around the country to network and learn about climate and business. Our next summit is less than a month away and is being hosted by the Ross School of Business in Ann Arbor, Michigan in February. And I encourage you to sign up for the waitlist if you're interested in attending. I heard that there could be some more waitlist spots becoming available in the next few days. Also, you can subscribe to our mailing list for live stream information, as we'll be able to live stream most of the keynotes for those who can't join us in person. Next, I wanted to highlight the ClimateCAP MBA Fellowship, which empowers 12 fellows to become the next generation of climate leaders and change makers. Key elements of the fellowship include learning and development sessions, networking, and self-directed project work, where students design and implement a climate action project. Throughout the fellowship, students receive mentorship and also attend cohort building activities virtually and in person. And we just announced the members of our new 2024 cohort last week and had our first meeting yesterday. So we're really excited about introducing them to you, and you can find out more information about this cohort as well as previous cohorts on our website. For those of you who are in school or prospective students, applications for the next cohort of fellows will open this fall. And lastly, and to highlight why you all are here today, I wanted to mention that our MBA Academy virtual learning series happens on a roughly monthly basis. So we're excited to bring these thought leaders directly to you throughout the academic year. So please be sure to check out our website to register for future events. We'll be taking the month of February off because we'll be at the summit and then resume March 8th with Lewis Perkins of the Apparel Impact Institute. But with that, I'd like to focus on our speaker today, Chrissa Pagitsas. Chrissa is a keynote speaker and strategic advisor to senior executives and boards on driving business value through global sustainability and ESG strategies. She is the principal and founder of Pagitsas Advisors and senior advisor to McKinsey Co. Recognized as a green bond champion by the Climate Bonds Initiative and a recipient of the U.S. Green Building Council Leadership Award, Chrissa led the green financing business at Fannie Mae and was the head of ESG. Chrissa's best-selling book, Chief Sustainability Officers at Work, explores the unique business opportunities and challenges tackled by chief sustainability officers and heads of ESG at Fortune 500 companies, including BlackRock, Coca-Cola, Duke Energy, and Procter & Gamble. And we'll be talking a lot more about those examples today. Chrissa holds an MBA from the Darden School of Business, one of our partner schools, and a BA from Johns Hopkins. I'm personally really excited to have this conversation, given my previous work experience in corporate sustainability. Prior to working here at ClimateCAP as the program lead, I worked in corporate sustainability roles at both LabCorp and Land O'Lakes, where I got to build their corporate sustainability programs with other corporate leaders, suppliers, clients, and partners. This topic is very important to me, very near and dear to my heart, and I know it is for many of our MBA audience as well, who are looking forward to getting into corporate sustainability roles. So with that, I'll stop sharing my screen and we'll move over to our conversation. So Chrissa, thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me, and absolutely thrilled to be speaking with MBA students and certainly part of this great alliance, which I'm thrilled, of course, that UBA is a part of. So thrilled to be here.
Great. Well, let's kick off. We heard a little bit about your bio at a very high level, but I think our audience would like to learn a little bit more about your career path and how you got to this point of writing your book, Chief Sustainability Officers at Work.
Sounds good. So it's interesting looking back at my 20 plus career, I've started chunking it into three parts. The first part very much was about learning the building blocks. And candidly, the building blocks did not make sense at the time. I started my career in the energy sector, building large scale IT systems, energy price forecasting, billing systems, nothing to do with renewable energy. But back in the early 2000s, commercial scale solar and wind were coming online and started disrupting that energy business. So I started learning about renewable energy. And then I started moving into energy efficiency. And then I started moving into green building, where I was advising clients on sustainability strategies. So all these pieces were building blocks for the second part of my career, which was building a new program, a new business based on sustainability. And that really reflects the last decade of my time, where I was first the head of green financing for Fannie Mae, where I built a $51 billion green bond business, and then became the first head of ESG. This third phase, Jessica, has really been about teaching, sharing the message, and becoming a multiplier, someone who actually helps catalyze, teach, bring forward the real sustainability and leadership principles that we need in order to hit some really big, ambitious climate goals, but also create value for businesses and society. So it's really the sort of teaching and catalyzing piece that led me to write my book, because I wanted to take a step back and say, hey, this is how I did it at Fannie Mae. Could there have been a smarter way to do it? What lessons learned about moving really big businesses like Procter & Gamble and Coca-Cola could I have learned and take away, and what could other people learn from it? So it's been an interesting three phases. We're in phase 3. I don't know if there's a phase 4, but those are the 3 phases right now.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for that. And I think, you know, for those of us who've seen the book, just from your own experience and then the profiles of the CSOs that you share, it's so clear that these CSOs have incredibly complex jobs. You mentioned your career evolution. I think a lot of leaders in this space would have similar experiences where they didn't necessarily start out in this and it has grown over time. So when you're looking and talking with these CSOs, what are some of the competing priorities that they're trying to balance when they're trying to do their jobs?
It's interesting. So competing priorities. I was thinking about this because competing priorities, I think, sort of fall into 2 buckets. One priority set is, what's the sustainability target? What's the sustainability strategy? And then the other is, what is the business strategy? And I would say historically, those 2 have been considered 2 different things, right? I don't think that's the way business thinks about it generally anymore, but we're trying to bring those 2 strategies together.
Sure.
So an example would be, right, in thinking about Iron Mountain, one of the CSOs that I interviewed in the book. When he's talking about the work that he did at Iron Mountain, he had to think about his goal to reduce the energy consumption, right, by half of all of Iron Mountain, which is a document storage company. Now, that's great. That's a great sustainability target. But in parallel, the business had a goal of increasing their data centers. What do data centers use? They use energy. So you've got increasing energy on a business side, while on the sustainability side, the strategy is supposed to be reduced by half. Now, there is an underlying business imperative that at the time Iron Mountain was using $40 million annually in energy costs. So of course you want alignment of the 2.
For sure.
So CSOs are dealing with this type of challenges all the time, and they're trying to bring the 2 together all the time.
Wow. Yeah, that's a really interesting example, and I think it's I'm sure you have multiple versions of that you could share that you've seen from others as well.
Yeah.
But where with such complexity, I think it's really easy to see why some of these CSOs as individuals, but also companies more broadly, are successful, and others are maybe struggling to make the impact that they seek out to, especially when you have such things that can be viewed by those who aren't more experienced at indirect conflict with one another. Can you share some of the best practices that you've seen in how leaders are really making these strategic business decisions?
I think first is that they are first looking at the company values. And I share this because if you don't have a good foundation of company values, then it's hard to implement and move forward with a sustainability strategy. So, for example, I'll pull from Kara Hurst, the Amazon CSO who I interviewed. You know, they have a company value, or they call them principles, right? That success and scale bring broad responsibility. It's not saying environmental responsibility, it's not saying social responsibility, but they kind of know they're the 800-pound gorilla, sort of. So, with great power comes great responsibility. That's a variation on that quote. So, first, Kara has a good foundation at the company value level. Then, what she's doing is she's actually looking at how can she communicate information about the sustainability strategy in a way that other people understand. And Amazon, as you know, and I'm sure many of the students know, very data driven. So they rely on dashboards. So what they have done at Amazon is start incorporating a dashboard that has return on investment, it has, expenses, it has what the actual target market share is going to change as a result of this new strategy, and then it has sustainability KPIs. So you're taking values and then you're also marrying operational level decision tools in order to be able to adjust, drive, and actually make sustainability goals real.
From personal experience, the data piece is a really interesting one. Thinking back to also data that's good enough versus perfect, and the speed of business decisions. And so this is bringing up a lot of fond memories for me as well from some of the challenges. And it's good to know that Amazon is struggling with it
They're
as well.
doing it too and struggling. Agreed. Yes.
I kind of want to talk about a little more around the struggle piece, because I think it's pretty universally understood that these are really difficult jobs. They're really rewarding jobs as well. But not every company can be Patagonia. Not every company can have the big alignment like Amazon. No one's perfect, though, even just the same. When you think about industries that are harder to decarbonize,
Yeah.
how do you think some CSOs or leaders in those organizations are balancing kind of that, knowing that it's a really hard to decarbonize industry with what they're trying to address from a social environmental perspective?
You know, I I think about Patagonia a lot because one, I have Patagonia clothes. So I think about it and I think about their message and I think about the way they operate and their emphasis on reuse of their clothes. But I will say that, and the textile industry, which they're in, has challenges and Patagonia hasn't solved it all. So if Patagonia hasn't solved it all, we have to be realistic in thinking about the hard to decarbonize industries like the energy industry, like the mining industry. And I could argue agriculture is very challenging, not just on decarbonization, but on water intensity, for example, overall land use, right? Without even getting into some of the social issues of migrant labor use, child labor use, and safe practices around, again, using ocean and beyond. All of this to say is that, first of all, there are CSOs at these very hard to decarbonize industries. So I actually take the stance, Jessica, that the first step is success, that there are CSOs at these companies, which was not the case even 5 years ago, right? Number one, there are CSOs that are starting to have this conversation. Number two, for these types of companies, their best bet is twofold. One, really think about product innovation. Do they have an R&D department? Can they bring in universities? Can they find ways to change their core product? That's different than operating on the sidelines, on the edge. We're not going to change the core business, but we're going to plant a few trees. That doesn't work. So their best bets is really to start about product innovation and product redesign. The second thing that I talk to my clients about and that I advise is often about radical, unconventional partnership. Where can you look outside of your current field? Let's say you're in agriculture. Can you take lessons learned from the textile industry? If you're in the automotive industry, can you take a look at the agriculture industry? Where are there nonprofits and government organizations that are fully committed to making changes? That's where you're going to get new ideas that's going to catalyze and multiply the changes that these industries need. So I don't think we can leave them behind, Jessica, to be candid. What I really want to do is catalyze, multiply, accelerate their decarbonization journey.
Absolutely. And I think just speaking from my own experience, going into agriculture, it was something that I thought a lot about was, as the first sustainability manager at Land O'Lakes, I have this huge opportunity to start making some impact, but also realizing that that's very different than going into an organization where there is a corporate sustainability team and there is this structure and framework. And so both of those things can be really rewarding and challenging at the same time. So that also really resonates with me.
Well, maybe I can ask you a question if that's okay.
Sure.
Were you the first at Land O'Lakes in that role?
I was, yeah.
So what drove that role to be created? Do you remember?
Yeah, it's interesting. And
Yeah.
so for those who might not be as familiar, Land O'Lakes is a farmer-owned cooperative. So just in its DNA, it's a little bit different than a lot of other organizations because it's actually owned by the dairy farmers. And so they had people working within the dairy side of the business on sustainability, but I was the first, and my role was created to really look at the operational side, kind of the way that we as a company process that milk in our facilities and the LEDs and our policies and our composting and all of those more operational pieces from sustainability. And so I think it was driven from a recognition that they needed help on this. I think there was some pressure from customers, which I think is a big driver for a lot of organizations. And I think the leadership just recognized that they were ready to make this a little bit more formal. So I got to do that for 4 years, and we made some great progress, and really proud of the work I did there.
That is incredible. And I would say it also echoes the journey of many CSOs, and even my own in arriving at the position of being the head of ESG or the head of sustainability, right? It wasn't like a lightning bolt that came out of the blue and said, today we're going to fund this one role, this one person in the company. It was a need from the business side. Customers are rumbling over here. Maybe somebody said something to the CFO at the last investor meeting, and it slowly coalesced to say, okay, we need to formalize it and we need to have a central strategy. I think that very much for your career, for my career, and many of the CSOs has been the journey that they've been on, because many times they've been the first. They were the first CSO or the first sustainability manager. I would say, Jessica, for us where we are now in 2024, right, and having these students on the call and then thinking, of course, about the upcoming conference, some of these CSOs are now either retiring or moving jobs, and these positions are now open, right? So you're no longer stepping into the first role, you're stepping into the second role, or you're stepping in as the second or third employee on the sustainability team when it used to be just one person. When I started the green financing business, it was just me, a mighty team of one, which then grew to a large team of 5. But still fairly small. So, I want to reflect for people on the call thinking about careers. We are seeing a shift, and we are seeing in some ways the professionalization and in some ways some standardization about these roles at many companies, but many of really the sort of Fortune 500, Fortune 1000. There are many, many, many publicly traded smaller companies and also privately held companies that have no sustainability person. And there's an opportunity there to move the needle as well. So just thinking about the career of sustainability and what that looks like.
Absolutely, and that's something I think I know Darden, Fuqua, and many of our other schools do is teach in this job hunt to have these informational conversations and have this outreach. They hadn't posted a job before I applied. I actually helped them write the job description, and then they made me interview for it, which was an interesting experience. But I think there's a lot of roles like that where the pieces all do have to come together. But if you're putting yourself out there, if you're having these conversations and being upfront about what you're interested in and where you might see an opportunity, I think companies are a little more receptive to that because they're recognizing the need as well.
I will say, so I did my MBA, as you mentioned, at Darden. I graduated in 2009. Not the best time to graduate in the Great Recession. So, and I knew at that point that I wanted to work in green building and green financing. And unfortunately, both of those industries, finance and real estate, really hard hit. But I had an interview with a very large San Francisco-based tea company. Don't need to name the name, but just out there in San Francisco. And I was determined to, at least if my role was going to be in IT, which I still love, by the way, that I wanted to make sure to have a sustainability connection, right? I might be on the sustainability team, the IT team, but I wanted to do something sustainability related. And that's something that I brought up in that interview, right? That's something that was key to me and key to the role. And I feel then, and I feel very much today, that every company's roles and jobs has a sustainability component, even if you're not on the sustainability team, right? So I share this because, as we just talked about sort of the first role, the mighty team of one. Companies, yes, have grown their sustainability teams, but very few have more than 5, right? The only place that maybe 10, right? I would say banks, right, have lots of people, but they're not on the sustainability team. They're usually in asset management. They're working on product development, right? They're doing green deals, but they're not the core sustainability team. They're actually finance professionals that work in sustainability. So I think an element maybe for us to discuss, and certainly welcome questions and comments from the listeners, to sort of, can you be in sustainability in any seat? And my short answer is yes, but would love to hear what folks are thinking about for their next career steps.
I want to ask a follow-up question for that, but thank you for bringing up. If any of our audience does have any questions, feel free to go ahead and submit those through the Q&A function, and we'll ask them towards the end of the call. But just going back to what you were just mentioning, as far as there's not necessarily a lot of explicit sustainability roles. These teams are sometimes still small, sometimes still growing. Where do you think students should be putting their talents and interest if they want to make an impact?
So my wish, my hope is that every student on this call goes into an air quotes traditional job. And what I mean by that is you go into HR, you go into finance, you go into strategy, you go into sales, you go into IT, you go into operations. Because when I walk in the room as a CSO, or you were to walk in the room, Jessica, I would be looking for that smart and sustainability educated person in each of those groups who I can look at and say, I know that you're going to take the portion of the sustainability goal that applies to HR or applies to operation, and you are going to be the person that runs with it. That differentiation is so important from your other colleagues in sales or finance, right? Not that they're bad, worse, anything, but to achieve these sustainability goals, we need people that know specialty business skills. When I mean specialty, I mean finance, HR, strategy, IT, and so on, but that you have that added layer of deep sustainability knowledge. it's much harder to then teach somebody because it takes another 6 months, it takes another year before they can run the ball. I need you to run with the ball now.
Yep.
And so so if, however, people on the call are not, that's not their passion, they want to be on the sustainability team, that's good too. I'm not trying to say don't do it. It's just that there are fewer jobs,
Yep.
and there's a lot of competition, much more competition than there was, let alone 5 years ago, let alone 10 years ago. So Scott, too, who's one of the CSOs that I interviewed, he's from Train, which does cold chain, and it does large heating and ventilation and air conditioning systems. Probably the Duke schools, most buildings have a Train something piece of equipment for their building. He talked about putting out a job posting for one person to join his team, and he has PhDs coming out with analyses on carbon, and he's got people with masters focusing on circularity. I mean, which is great. It didn't exist, but I just want to be thoughtful about just the high level of competition and how are you going to get in the door? It's going to be because you understand the business and sustainability.
That's absolutely from similar to what we've heard, and we work with a lot of employers, and I think having that functional expertise, having a concentration in marketing or whatever it may be, and having gone through something,
That's right.
sustainability certificate, that actually really sets you apart in a recruiting perspective because you've got that broader understanding of this complexity we've been talking about.
Yeah. Yep.
So I want to talk a little bit more about the company piece. And
Yep.
so a lot of companies have a lot of things to say about sustainability.
They do.
What's your advice for students as they're trying to evaluate, if a company is really in on this journey, if they're going to be interested in helping them integrate sustainability into their roles in the future?
So do your due diligence. Use those MBA skills just like you would for a case, just like you would analyzing an M&A. Do your due diligence. So yes, look if they have an ESG report online, but take it a step deeper. Look in their 10K, right? As a publicly traded company, and if you're looking at these types of companies, they're going to have all of this available for their investors. What are they actually saying about the risks associated with their business? And are they taking steps to mitigate it, right? The 10K has to go to the SEC. So you can't sort of, you shouldn't be greenwashing in your 10K, let alone any type of washing in your 10K. Read it. I think then the other piece is not only read the 10K and look at the risks, but also take a look at where they're spending their money, right? To the degree that the expenses are detailed, take a look, right? Are they putting any grants out? Where are those grants going? Is it $500 or is it $500,000? Big difference, right? And is the money that they're putting, going to organizations that you care about? Is it to reputable organizations that is having impact? Then the last piece that I would look at is where you can look for their R&D signals, right? Research and development. Are they brave enough to pilot? This is a little bit harder. You have to do a little bit more sleuthing. But what you're looking for is indications that they're brave enough to say that they don't have the right answers. So a company that I interviewed for my book and a CSO, Ezgi Barcenas from Anheuser-Busch, Unilever, Coca-Cola, and Anheuser-Busch put together a partnership to give money to new startups to help them solve their sustainability goals. And they're on their 5th cohort. Every year, they do the selection process for startups because, as Ezgi told me, they don't have the answers to meet their sustainability targets. So they needed to be brave enough to pilot. So try and ferret that out. The last piece I would say is, of course, talk to people that work at the companies. That should be an obvious step, but just as a reminder, talk to people where you can to understand, are they really delivering on their sustainability goals?
I want to take a step away from the recruiting and towards more of
Sure.
the CSOs themselves and the leaders that they have to be
Sure.
within these organizations. And I know a big passion of yours is understanding leaders' personalities and their priorities and what leadership looks like in this space. And so I'm curious if you could talk a little bit about how their individual personalities and priorities impact the way that they're doing their CSO jobs.
Yeah, I would say that um, many of the CSOs did not have a sustainability background, and they brought in sort of their personality and professional experience to bear. So, for example, B. Perez, who is CSO as well as Chief Marketing Officer at Coca-Cola, came into this fully with marketing, right? She's always thinking about the consumer, what's going to be the message that resonates. And she shared with me one of the things that she had to do when she came in was sort of reevaluate all of the communications that they had around Coca-Cola's water use, right? And all of the work that they were doing. Some of you may be aware that some of the water that Coca-Cola was sourcing, right, she shares in the book, it was coming from water depleted areas. So how could they be not truthfully, but authentically talking about water issues when they had protesters protesting the water trucks taking water out to the distribution and bottling plants, right? So, that is something that comes to mind. You have other people who are very much passionate about the issues around human rights, right? So James Gowan at Verizon talked about how he came from a procurement and supply chain background. So for him, the environmental issues are certainly important, but he's thinking about human rights, right? All of our electronic sort of bits and pieces, right? Where are they being manufactured? And is slave labor being used? Is there forced labor being used? Right? So things that people care about do naturally come through, but I think it's a passion plus it's a professional experience. They're looking at the work through the lens that matters most for them and then their business.
And a kind of supplement to that, more from a skills perspective, what are some of the skills and traits that you see that show up over again in these leaders that are really allowing them to succeed in these roles?
You know, I think we sort of beat the drum on the hard skills, the technical skills, the
Mhm,
functional
mhm.
skills, right? Marketing, finance, IT, operations. So yes, you need to know those. I think the really smart, I would say sustainability leaders at any level, one of the most important things that you can do or have is when to push and get to a go, a yes, and when to pull back. I know you're like, huh, this seems very, very, very soft, very, right? But I got to tell you, it's one of the hardest lessons I learned in my career. And one of the hardest things that I advise my clients who are CSOs or chief legal officers or people who are leading these strategies, because pushing at the wrong time gets you to a harder no, right? Sometimes you just need to let them be and you got to move to somebody else that's ready to say yes. And that can be hard. You're like, no, I need to get to this yes. And the reality isn't. So I think one, it's knowing when to push and when to pull back. I think the second one is related to this. It's really understanding the personal priorities of the peers that you're trying to influence. So it's related.
Mhm.
But if Fatima is about to retire in 6 months, I doubt that Fatima is really going to want to say yes to some really big project that's going to ruin her legacy.
Yeah.
She's not. And if Joe is just starting his career, but he really cares about procurement and he doesn't really care about marketing, don't try and get his approval on the marketing messages. Figure out what procurement matters because procurement is what's going to get him promoted to the next level. So this may seem very basic, but it's these softer skills that really allow the CSOs to get to the actual implementation of putting in renewable energy, changing the way a product is developed, making sure that a new clause against forced labor is put into every supplier's contract that is getting to the impact that we all talk about.
Sure. I'm going to ask one more question, and then we're going to move over to some from our audience. So please go ahead and submit those if you haven't already. But I think just compounding a little bit on what you were just talking about of when to push and when to pull back, I think there's a little bit of burnout sometimes that can happen for some of the, not just sustainability leaders, but this is probably true more broadly as well.
Sure.
But do you have any examples or any thoughts on how CSOs are navigating through that burnout, especially in this very this space where people have a lot of personal passions, they have a lot of
Yeah.
ties to it. How do they preserve that optimism?
I think in a couple of ways. I think one, we do seek each other out, right? I have one very good CSO friend. She happens to live here in Washington, D.C. We regularly get together for sushi and sake just to just to connect and talk about what's frustrating, what's working, and then to problem solve. I think you need that, and I think that has to happen. I think what we also do is we look for places to restore ourselves in a larger setting and understand that we are making an impact, that boulder that we're all collectively pushing uphill isn't fully crushing us, right? So whether that's finding a women in sustainability network, right? Whether it's being an Aspen Institute fellow, applying and being a part of that, whether it is going to an industry conference and going to some place where you're going to be inspired and learn, I think that's really important, right? To me, ClimateCAP is that regenerative experience, right? And you've got the conference coming up in February. So it's not just an opportunity to learn and network, but I think it's also exciting, right? To see, for example, the ClimateCAP fellows, right?
Yep.
I saw the list and I was like, wow, these people are incredible. I can't wait to see their projects and get to meet them. So I think those are sort of two structured ways, Jessica, to sort of restore. I would say that for me personally, I really enjoy hiking and I just need to be in the woods. I'm lucky to live in Washington, D.C. with a small but important park in the middle of D.C., Rock Creek Park. So I go walking in Rock Creek Park. It's not the Shenandoahs, it's not the Rocky Mountains, but it's a way to feel restored. So I think we need to use a combination because the burnout is real. And if we don't, we don't get restored.
I agree. I think it's about finding your community, whatever that may be. And I appreciate this shout out to the summit because that is some feedback that we get from students every year of just they might have their own group at their own school that they spend a lot of time with, but to see that amplified across over 40 partner schools, it gives you a lot of hope and a lot of energy for sure.
Well, if I could also make another observation, I think some of the most valuable creative partnerships I've made have been meeting people from other industries at conferences, right? So I mentioned earlier sort of the radical unconventional partnerships. I think for people attending, it's to think about who are these people that I'm meeting from other schools that are then going to go work in other industries that I might be calling in 2 years and being like, hey, Fred, I need help with this, or Malik, how did we do this over here? Can you tell me? So that interconnection is critical. So can't wait to hear how this year's ClimateCAP goes.
Thank you. All right, I'm going to read a few questions that have come in. So during your interviews, was there anything that particularly surprised you about the CSO role? Did you learn anything unexpected?
What was I surprised about? Candidly, I don't know that there was any surprises because I felt having been in the role, I could relate to many parts of it. I think maybe if there was a surprise, I would say if there was a surprise though, it probably was how complex it's not the surprise, it's how different the stakeholder mapping was for each of the different
Mm,
industries, right? So you talked about in Land O'Lakes, right? Dairy farmers, right? The stakeholders for BlackRock are very different than what they are for Coca-Cola,
yeah.
right? And so I think just what emphasized for me is how much you need to really have your own custom stakeholder map in order to really be able to move the needle. So I talked about peers, right? Fine. But also think about the organizations, this industry association versus this protest activist group. Like you need to think about who you really need to, you really have to be grounded in your stakeholders. And I learned a lot about other industries that I don't have expertise in, like bottling and manufacturing. So,
Great,
yeah.
thanks. And as you mentioned earlier, we were talking about kind of establishing sustainability teams versus those that are already more established. But there are quite a few that are still adding their first executives.
Yep.
What are a piece of advice or two that you would give to someone who's coming in as the first CSO in a company?
Oh man. Um, find your local Rock Creek Park. Find your sushi and sake buddy. Um, I would actually say this. So in addition to that, um, truly figure out your internal stakeholders. Like I said, like map those out. I actually work with my clients to map out all of their internal stakeholders, what they care about, how much they understand about sustainability. And then second, figure out the quick wins that matter to those stakeholders. I think with sustainability minded people like ourselves, I do think we are more systems thinkers and long-term thinkers. We're thinking about 2030, we're thinking about 2050, we're thinking about movement of water over the next 20 to 50 and 100 years. Most non-sustainability business people are not. They are quarterly, half yearly, annual, maybe biannual focus. So if you want to get buy-in for your long-term strategy, don't spend 8 months coming up with a strategy and then hope for their buy-in. In the first 2 months, in the first 3 months, get some quick wins that matter to them, even if you don't feel it moves the needle that much, because that short-term buy-in helps you get the big buy-in on the bigger strategy. So don't spend a year working on the strategy.
And build your credibility as quickly as you
Build
can.
credibility. Yeah.
So we've got questions from the skeptical side of
Yeah.
corporate sustainability. So, in a Fortune 500 company, do you think that there are CSOs that are basically figureheads there, or they're really focused more on the greenwashing and the messaging, as opposed to, taking that authentic opportunity to make real change?
Mhm. I do not have an objective assessment of every CSO. But statistically, one could say yes, right? On a bell curve, right? There's probably somebody over here that is doing that. Do I think that's every CSO? No. I think that what most CSOs are trying to do authentically is address the internal pressures, get through internal politics, line up with budgets, understand where their board is going to get to yeses. And some of this does have to do with working with people that are anti-ESG. So they have to dial things back in order to get to yes. It's a tough answer, Jessica, which is that it's not pretty, and it's not pretty, but I think that there are probably some. But my feeling is that we have to find the ones that are moving the needle forward. Those are the people you want to have sushi and sake with. Those are the people that you want to be creating those partnerships with.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
So kind of looking to the future,
Yep.
do you see a model where sustainability is so embedded within the organizations that you don't need a CSO? Is that something you hope for? Do you think the CSO role is
I,
always discussed?
I hope for it, but I don't think that it'll go away. I don't think it should go away. I truly do believe that The CSO has a lot of knowledge around sustainability and ESG that the rest of the company will never have, and they never should be asked to have it, right? The nitty-gritty of circularity and recycling a certain textile and what does that mean? That's probably not what the marketing department of X company needs to know, but somebody needs to have that technical knowledge, right? And I think there is an important role around that central strategy and that enterprise level goal setting that sits with the CSO. So I don't foresee the role of CSO going away. What I actually hope for is that every seat has a sustainability bullet in the job description, but
Yes.
that's specific to that job.
Yeah.
That's what I'm aiming for, and that's part of the work that I'm doing to catalyze and to multiply sustainability is how do we get sustainability in every seat?
Great. I have one more audience question and then one last one for me, and we'll wrap up.
Yeah.
If anyone does have any more, feel free to shoot them in the chat. But we've made our way through most of the list here. For students graduating this year and thinking about where they can make the biggest impact on environmental issues, is there any place you think that they should look, any specific companies or industries where they might be able to make the most change?
Make the most change. Um, you know, I would look at two industries. I would actually look at the building industry, and that certainly personal bias, but buildings are responsible for 40% of carbon emissions, at least in the United States from the EPA, and that number really is a global number. 40% is a big number. So how we use buildings, how we reuse buildings, the technology that goes in buildings, even the material that's in buildings. I'm a board member for an organization called Healthy Building Network, which is focused on how do we remove toxic chemicals from building materials like formaldehyde and forever chemicals. There's so many different parts of buildings that would benefit from people passionate. I would say that would be one. The other area is actually, I think, in the textiles industry. I think the reality is we all wear clothes. We have fabric in every part of our home and work. And it is a place where we could use a lot of innovation. It's a challenging industry and it's just starting. It's actually behind the building industry. So if somebody wants to get in on the ground floor and start working on solutions, whether marketing, financial, technology, operations, I think textiles and fashion would be an interesting one.
Great, thank you. We had another question come in. This is about skill building. So for those people who maybe already are in a role or are just looking to kind of build their skill set and knowledge of this space more broadly, are there any resources that you can recommend?
Sure. And I would say when we talk about skills, are we talking technical skills? Are we talking leadership skills?
Maybe
do
one of each. Could we do
sense?
that?
Okay. So if it's a technical skill, right? So textiles, right? How do you recycle textiles? I would look to industry associations and I would look to colleges and universities that are perhaps offering certificates. So
Sure.
I do think that's an important one. Um, I think when it comes to some of the soft stuff, I don't, aside from getting your MBA and working through leadership classes, some of this is just experience. So I'm not sure that there's sort of a place. I mean, you can learn, you can read books certainly, and you can take LinkedIn courses, and of course you're doing your MBA. You know what, if there was anything I would do is I really would find a regular check-in time with a peer to be able to do some feedback to each other. Hey, I had this tough question, issue come up. How would you solve it? In some ways, it's self-guided learning.
Great. Thank you. Last question from me, and then we'll wrap up. But do you have any final words of advice for our MBA students?
Sure. First off, I am absolutely thrilled that you're here, right? The fact that you're here tells Jessica, right, that this is an important part of not a passion, your side project. It's a part of who you are. And that's actually something very powerful. One of the hardest comments that I received early in my career was, Chrissa, you're really passionate about sustainability. And at the time, I received it as it was a ding. It was a ding, like you're passionate, you feel too much, right? But over the years, I've come to accept it. And I actually now say, yes, I'm passionate about it. And I am bringing, I'm a financial services expert. I built a $51 billion market based on green bonds. You know, I have changed the way that people think about sustainability in the financial services industry. So what I would say to you is, if people say, why do you care about this stuff, or it's soft, or the environment, take it instead as a superpower. I'm so passionate that I'm looking for creative partnerships. I'm looking for new products. I'm looking for ways to improve my company, both the bottom line and the environment and society. So don't get dissuaded by your passion, but apply it. Apply it in a very directed way in order to have the impact that you want.
Well, thank you so much. I completely agree. I think that's going to be what sets a lot of people apart going forward. So with that, I want to thank you. We're going to wrap up here. Thank you so much, Chrissa, for that incredible conversation. And it was a lot of fun and sharing your expertise with our MBA audience. If you'd like to learn more about some of the other CSOs that Chrissa has profiled, please be sure to check out her book, Chief Sustainability Officers at Work. And I'd also like to thank our attendees for joining us. As a reminder, we have many ways to get involved with ClimateCAP, to build your community, to build those people that you're going to be working with throughout your career. So make sure that you're signed up for our newsletter, which is climatecap.org, to stay up to date with all of our news and events and more. We've got LinkedIn, Instagram, YouTube, and that's where we also post all of our MBA recordings, MBA Academy recordings, including this one. So please register for our next MBA Academy on March 8th, where we will be speaking with Louis Perkins of the Apparel Impact Institute. We hope to see you there, and thank you.